From the humanitarian crisis to women's rights, we take an in-depth look inside Afghanistan. Hello everyone, I'm Asiye Namdar and you're watching The Heat. Five months after the Taliban announced a new government in Afghanistan, life has been difficult for women and girls. The United Nations says more than 23 million Afghans are facing acute hunger, and 1 million children under 5 are at risk of dying. Most secondary schools remain closed, denying girls a right to an education. Women no longer have a voice in the government. The majority not allowed to work, and violence against them is on the rise. The Taliban insists they're not the Taliban of 20 years ago and even issued a special decree on women's rights. It says women should not be considered property and it cannot be forced into marriage. But getting an education or a job is not among them. For more on the rights of Afghan women and children, let's bring in our distinguished panel. Joining us from California is Mahbouba Seraj, a prominent advocate for women's rights and the executive director of Afghan Women's Skills Development Center. From Istanbul, Shahrzad Akbar is the former chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. From here in Washington, D.C., Sanam Naraghi Anderlini is the founder and executive director of International Civil Society Action Network. And Soraya Leni is an author and international journalist based in Kabul. Ladies, welcome to the program. I want to begin with the disappearance of a number of women activists. A lot of concern, a lot of outrage about what's happened to these women. Many of them are still missing, including Tamana Paryani and Parwana Ibrahim Khali. The Taliban have denied any knowledge or any role. They've blamed it on rogue elements, if you will. Let's listen to what the United Nations had to say about this.
We are gravely concerned for the safety of the disappeared women and their family members. We continue to press the de facto authorities for information on these cases and for an effective, transparent investigation. We stress the need to ensure their physical and mental integrity and call for their immediate release.
Soraya, let me begin with you. You are in Kabul. What do we know about these disappearances?
Well, at least 4 women, 4 protesters who have been protesting consistently for months for a variety of reasons, women's rights included, have been detained, as well as some family members. And one of the biggest problems with this is there's such a lack of transparency and a lack of clarity as to who exactly arrested them, what department, under what pretext have they been charged, will they be charged, and where they are, what conditions they're being held in. So this is really worrying, not just regular Afghans, but some of their colleagues who are still speaking out and trying to speak out here about what's happened to them. They put the blame squarely at the foot of the Taliban, despite the group and some of its members, including the acting foreign minister, being very cagey in their comments and not really specifically answering any of these questions that many people have as to their welfare and to their exact locations.
Shahrzad, let me go on to you, and really education, the future and fate of young girls in Afghanistan. Millions are stuck at home, deprived of an education, while public universities reopened their door to girls recently. Most secondary schools are still shut down. The Taliban say they're not against education. They say it's a question of capacity. I'm not sure what that means. Will the Taliban keep their promise and open these secondary schools for girls by Nowruz or the New Year in March?
We really don't know. I mean, that's a big question on minds of all Afghans, particularly Afghan girls and women. Looking at Taliban's track record, when they were first in power, they kept promising that girls could go back to school when the conditions were appropriate, whatever that meant. And they have been saying similar things now, although high schools are open in a few provinces, but in many they remain closed. And remember, since the 90s, Afghanistan has changed so much. It's a transformed society. Every village that I visited, south, north, east, Afghanistan, anywhere I went, people would ask for schools for girls, teachers for girls. So Taliban are going against public opinion and keeping the schools closed. And this is, I think, the clearest example of the gender apartheid they are imposing.
So if they haven't managed to open secondary schools up until now, 6 months later, what makes us believe March 21st, they will keep their word?
I'll really believe it when I see it. I don't know what steps they are taking. They are not being very transparent about what exact steps they think is needed before they reopen schools. And my recommendation to the international community has been keep asking them where we are, keep asking aid organizations on the ground to check the progress, if there is any progress, to make sure that it's not, we don't wake up on 23rd March and schools are still closed.
Mahbouba, you recently had the opportunity to give an impassioned, powerful speech before the UN Security Council. What do you want the world to know about the plight of Afghan girls and women, and also about the dire humanitarian crisis?
Good morning to everybody. My whole concern, honestly, at this point, is to tell the world to do whatever it can. Because, although everything is is turned around and put on us and on our lap, and the world is saying, well, do this and do that and do this and do that, but they know very well that it's really not in the hands of the Afghans. So what I really want the world to do is to prevent, this whole situation to get from bad to worse. In other words, from where it is today to get into a lot worse situation. So for that matter, we really have to do something. We really have to start, talking with the Taliban more. We really have to hold them responsible and accountable to what is happening in Afghanistan. So that is what I really want. Because right now there are these 3 girls that I know. And then there's going to be, and then there are talks of some women that I haven't met them personally, but they say from Hazar that they are in their custody. And then also, and these things are happening because there is such a, how shall I say, a rift among themselves, amongst the Taliban. So the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And this is getting more and more dangerous as the time goes by, because continuously they turn around and they say, we don't know. If you ask a group of them, they're powerful ones, the ones that are in charge, they say they don't know. So if you don't know, as one of the most powerful men of the Taliban in a high position, then who are we supposed to go and ask? Whom are we supposed to hold responsible for all of this? This is where my concern and question is. And I've been asking them exactly this. Who is responsible? Whom shall we go to? Which door shall we knock on to say, what happened to our people? Because, this is not right. This cannot continue. What they have done to our girls. It's like, this is the question of Afghanistan's namus. These are our namus, for God's sakes, these girls. And what they have done, from what I have seen, that they have just walked on the streets of Kabul a few times and asked for food, work, and freedom. Freedom that they are so right about it because they have never been under the Taliban before. They were too young the first time the Taliban were there. And some of them were not even born. So what is it so horrible that these women asked, that they're supposed to be disappearing like this and getting this punishment? I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Of course, there's the issue of girls and women and their education, their hopes, their dreams, their future. And then there's the economic crisis.
There's all of that, Ossia John. But that in every single one of them, this situation of the woman education. I mean, right now, even in the regular years, the school would still be closed because of winter time. And also, don't forget, and I'm not making any excuses for the Taliban at all on this one, but at the same time, there was COVID. So that was the COVID reason why the schools were closed for the longest time in Kabul, before the Taliban. So So I know it takes a while, but now they said they're going to be opening, and we are just, sitting around, and we are just looking at their action to see what happens.
A lot of young Afghan girls are also sitting around stuck at home. Sanam, let me talk about the economic crisis. Growing calls for the release of Afghan assets frozen since the Taliban takeover. Now President Biden has issued an executive order splitting $7 billion in frozen funds between the victims of the September 11th attacks and humanitarian aid for Afghanistan. You have been very critical of the U.S. response and its disastrous U.S. withdrawal back in August, and now we have this. I just want to get your reaction.
Thank you, Asya Jan, and hello to everybody who's joining, Mahbouba Jan and others. Honestly, I have no words anymore. This is insult to injury, and it's such a dangerous move because these assets were Afghan assets. There is a massive humanitarian crisis, as you say. The world is trying to figure out how to get these assets into the hands of Afghans on the ground and in their own country. And meanwhile, the U.S. is coming along and making this decision to give it to the families of the 9/11 victims in a situation where these assets are not the United States assets to dole out, number one. Number two, there were no Afghans involved in the 9/11 attacks. If we want to give compensation to the 9/11 families, which we should, ask Saudi Arabia, ask Egypt. Most of the the terrorists that went into the buildings and attacked the Pentagon, most of them were Saudi. So if we want compensation, why aren't we asking them? Why on earth are we taking money out of the hands and mouths of Afghans? And the real question for me in terms of what's going on is that the United States, in their actions and in their enablement of the Taliban's victory, it's not a military question. It was the failure of diplomacy and politics. That's what it was. They systematically kept women out of the negotiations in Doha. They systematically ignored when women warned about what the Taliban was and never asked for civilian protection, right? Civilians being protected. One of the things that I challenge in terms of the Taliban's rhetoric is that for 3 years they were able to give the order so that not one single American soldier was killed. So they had leadership then. How come they don't have that same leadership, command and control now when it comes to attacks on women and what's happening? So are they playing a game with the international community and playing bait and switch all the time?
Oh, such difficult issues, so complicated. Soraya, I want to get to the state of the healthcare system in Afghanistan. It has survived for nearly 2 decades, almost entirely on international funding. And now a very different, heartbreaking situation.
Well, exactly. Much like most of the government funding was from abroad, from foreign governments and foreign organisations for the past 20 years. So too was the medical system in terms of paying doctors as well, in terms of getting equipment. So many of these hospitals were really not in good condition anyway before the Taliban takeover 6 months ago. They were suffering from, lack of hygiene, lack of basic services, quite frankly. But the situation has become exponentially worse. And one of the reasons is, of course, doctors haven't been paid for many months. Some got a salary in December, so that was good news. But imagine going to work for 6 months without any kind of money and trying to actually get to work and pay a taxi when you yourself have financial problems. But doctors nonetheless were showing up. So now we also have this COVID crisis, another wave of COVID here in the country. There's only about 5 hospitals, for example, across Afghanistan who can actually treat patients for COVID-19, and just one here in the capital, Kabul, the Japanese hospital. And their ICUs are already full. They're running out of ventilators, oxygen, for example, a healthcare system that's very much reliant on the outside world, the ability to import medications. And as we know from other countries that are under US sanctions like Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, this is a huge problem when it comes to importing medications and humanitarian goods, regardless of whether or not there are caveats about not sanctioning those particular things. It has an effect. So I was speaking to a leading maternal health care specialist just the other day about whether or not they were having issues getting medication for expected mothers, for example, and other women. And they said just very basic things like a contraceptive pill, for example, that they would usually prescribe to some women. That was getting harder and harder to find, and the price has gone up around 5 times. And this is in a country where the economy is basically collapsing. So it's already hard for people to afford things anyway. Now it's harder for people to actually get medication, including very specialized medication, in what is already a very bad situation.
And, you know, all the things you described, Soraya, is adding to the despair. I've been reporting on the situation in Afghanistan for many, many years. And one thing that really stands out to me is despair, is a lack of hope. I want you to listen to this woman who happens to have the same name as my daughter, Roya, and see what she says about that despair.
I feel hopeless. I have lost all hope. I am stuck at home. My dreams were not achieved. I had dreams that my children would be educated. I had dreams that they would advance with the rest of the world and be recognized. I had dreams that we would develop and progress. All of my hopes and dreams have come to nothing now. I am sitting at home with all these hopes and dreams.
All these hopes and dreams just dashed. Just hard to hear. Shahrzad, what do you tell these women who have absolutely no hope?
I think this is the darkest period in our history, I mean, in our recent history, and it's really hard to say anything meaningful, particularly to women in Afghanistan. But what does give me hope and encouragement is the fact that there is resistance ongoing, that women especially are mobilizing despite all the hardship. We already hear about secret schools. Afghans in diaspora are trying to organize educational opportunities online. Women are protesting on the streets. People are sharing information with media, with human rights organizations to keep the light on despite the challenges. So it's a country that has changed a lot, and I don't think this operation will last. But it's hard to see the end right now. It's a very difficult moment, and I personally have to, and I'm outside Afghanistan in a much better position, but I personally have to fight every day to keep a little bit of hope alive.
And Mahbouba, what do you say to women who've run out of hope? And what is your message to the Taliban? I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I know you had a chance to go to Oslo and speak with the Taliban face to face. What is your takeaway? I think I read somewhere you said you were hopeful. Do you still share that hope?
Well, you know, it was for the first time, actually, that after the takeover, and something that I really wanted for it to happen in Kabul, and that was for us to sit down, for the civil society of Afghanistan, the women, and all of us, and talk with the Taliban. So it was the first time that that happened, and the Taliban actually listened to us, and we listened to them. So for the 4 hours, we all sat, you know, behind these desks, and they talked, we listened, we talked, and they listened. So whether anything is going to come out of this or not, that's an entirely different story. But at the same time, at least to me, that was a door that opened. We cannot actually solve this problem by killing another thousands of Afghans. This is enough. No more killing. We killed each other, and everybody made it possible for us to kill each other and be killed for the past 43 years. This is not a joke anymore. You know, has anyone sat down and kind of really have taken the weight of this phrase? For 43 years, we were unable to kill, and we were killed. Each other, and were killed by others. I mean, this is like not real anymore. I mean, two of the world's biggest powers, Russia in those days, in the 70s, and the United States now in the 20s. You know, they tried to take our country away from us and do whatever it is that they were doing, and then they did not succeed. So what that this means something, that we are not really doing the right thing. We are never going to solve the problems the way, you know, with fighting, with killing, with wars. It just won't happen. But it's not going to happen either with some elite group of people, men and women, sitting behind desks in Doha and talking about the future and the lives of 38 million Afghans, which in most cases don't have a single thing in common with those people that were representing them. How are we going to solve this?
Yeah.
This is not going to happen. This is for the birds, truly. I don't know what it is. Is the world trying to fool us and thinks we are so stupid that we keep on doing this? And right now, they're after us again so we could continue this war? So why don't they come up to the scene of the war and announce, we want this war to go on in Afghanistan for another 40 years. So at least we know. At least we know.
I hope they're listening, Mahbouba.
People that are hopeful like me and people that are hopeful like Shahzad sitting in Turkey, at least we know, and then we don't hope for this. This is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
I can feel the pain and the heartbreak in your voice. But moving forward here, no government at this point has recognized the Taliban government. But a number of countries, China, Iran, have engaged the Taliban. And this is a question for all of you. Is that the right approach? Engagement to perhaps encourage or push the necessary changes? And Shahzad, let me go to you first.
Thank you. I absolutely think that engagement is key. I also encouraged EU countries to engage. I don't think Afghanistan should be isolated. My biggest fear is that Afghanistan will be forgotten and it will just become a humanitarian charity case. And with reducing attention, there will be reducing aid, and so our people will suffer even more. But there should be terms to the engagement. I think there should be close consultation with Afghans, particularly Afghan civil society. And of course, if there is anything beyond humanitarian assistance, there should be discussion around conditions for that. And engagement should not mean recognition. That's very, very clear. Many Afghans, in many parts of the country, those who are suffering from targeted killings, from extrajudicial killings, from torture, from illegal detentions, not only women, but men, are asking the world, do not recognize Taliban unless they change their ways and unless they uphold the human rights of all Afghans.
Sanam, actually, I want to switch gears really quickly. Speaking of human rights, the Taliban issued a decree on women's rights last year. Just want to get your reaction, what you make of it. It states women should not be forced into marriage and that widows have a share in their husband's property. Critics call this basically a PR campaign for the West and not necessarily for Afghans and Afghan women. Sana.
Thank you. So I think, as my colleagues have said, we are now at a point of show, not tell. The Taliban of 20 years ago didn't have the same external PR machine that they've had now. They've had an incredible charm offensive that has actually worked quite well with lots of diplomats, male diplomats around the world. And the issue now is, if they say no forced marriage, if they say girls can go to school and so forth, as my colleague said, let's see it. Let's see women being able to go to work and being able to be out on the streets safely. And Asijan, the implications of this right now, we're talking about what it means for Afghan women and Afghan girls and literally unborn children moving into generations. But it's also implications in other countries. In my network, we work with women in 40 countries. Already in the Philippines, our partners are saying that the ban on child marriage is being contested by extremist Muslim imams there because they're pointing to what the Taliban is doing and saying, look, over there it's okay to have child marriage. That's Islam. Why can't we do it here? So the Taliban has emboldened and is inspiring extremist movements everywhere. That's number one. Number two, let's be frank, Europe, the United Kingdom, the North America, they are obsessed with the problem of refugees. They don't want more refugees. Frankly speaking, if the situation in Afghanistan doesn't become safe for women and girls and men and boys to live their lives with dignity, people are going to continue to leave. Nobody wants to have a daughter growing up in an environment where they might be forced off the street or married off at the age of 9 out of desperation economically or otherwise. So the implications of what happens there and what Afghan women are doing on the ground there, risking their lives, isn't just for themselves. It genuinely has implications around the world globally and geopolitically.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but before we end the program, I want to pose my last question to our Afghan friends, Shahrzad and Mahbouba. What is your biggest fear and your biggest hope moving forward? Mahbouba, you go first.
My biggest fear is this situation worsening, which is something that I said before. That is my biggest fear. That this whole thing is going to collapse because, as I said, the Taliban from within, they're going to break, and this is going to break them as a group, and then every single one of their factions or their people are going to do their own thing anywhere in Afghanistan the way they want to, and that will be an absolute chaos, and we are kind of heading towards that. My hope, my biggest hope is that if by some magic, I don't even know whether that's going to happen, if we could actually sit down as Afghans and really, really talk to each other, for maybe one of the very few times that we have ever sat down and talked as the people of Afghanistan, not as only the Pashtuns and the Hazaras and the Uzbeks and the Tajiks, no, but as the people of Afghanistan, as Afghans. We could sit down and talk and see what we can do, because we have been put in such a horrible place. So maybe we can get this right by working together. That is my hope. That is my hope.
And Shahrzad, you have the last word here.
Thank you. My biggest fear is complete isolation and disengagement, international disengagement. I think that will make the situation even worse than it is now, and now it's pretty horrific. It's the worst human rights situation in the world, I think, particularly for women. My biggest hope, women of Afghanistan, inside and outside, fighting for the rights of all Afghans every day.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. Such an important, insightful, impassioned conversation. We certainly appreciate your insights. Mahbouba Seraj, Shahrzad Akbar, Sanam Naraghi Anderlini, and Soraya Leni. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington. Thank you for watching.